We think of them as these larger-than-life legends, right? The masterminds behind the victory in World War II. But what if some of those heroic reputations were built on something a little less solid? Today, we're going to peel back the layers of propaganda and take a hard look at the complicated, messy reality behind the medals. So, let's start with a big question. What actually makes a general great? We have this image of battlefield geniuses, always 10 steps ahead of the enemy. But is that the whole story? Is it just about tactical brilliance? Or can a really, really good PR machine create a legend out of thin air? That's what we're going to dig into. Look, World War II gave us this whole lineup of heroes, names that just scream victory. But behind all the newsreels and the myth-making, there's a much more complex story about how battles were really won, and sometimes how they were tragically and unnecessarily lost. Okay, so let's dive right in with our first case study. This is a general who, on paper, looked like the perfect commander. Major General Lloyd Fredendall. He rolled into North Africa with a top-notch reputation, and he had the backing of some of the most powerful people in the army. And this is where things get really weird with Lloyd Fredendall. You have the Army Chief of Staff himself, George C. Marshall, calling him one of the best. But then you talk to the guys on the ground, like the famously blunt George Patton, who flat out called him a physical and moral coward. So how on earth could two top generals have such completely opposite views of the same man? This number pretty much tells you everything you need to know. 70 miles. Let that sink in for a second. That's how far away from the front lines Fredendall built his command post in Tunisia. He wasn't just disconnected from his troops. He was literally miles and miles away from the battle he was supposed to be running. So while his guys were getting ready to face Rommel's legendary Africa Corps, what was Fredendall doing? He had an entire battalion of combat engineers, men who were desperately needed at the front, blasting tunnels to build him this gigantic, bomb-proof underground bunker. His own soldiers had a name for it, sarcastically of course, Shangri-La. And the most damning part of all, he never, not once, went to visit the front lines. So how did he lead from the safety of his bunker 70 miles away? Well, with orders like this. And I'm not kidding, this is a real command he gave over the radio. He made up his own bizarre code, calling infantry walking boys and artillery pop guns. His own officers were completely stumped. One of them even said it would take German intelligence just as long to figure out what he was saying as it took them. So what happens when you have that kind of leadership vacuum? You get this, the Kasserine Pass disaster. This was America's first major throwdown with the German army, and it was a total train wreck. Our troops, poorly positioned and totally confused, were just routed. It was a humiliating defeat that cost over 6,000 American casualties. So, you'd think after a failure that catastrophic, his career would be over, right? Nope. To keep morale up back home, Fredendall was quietly shipped back to the States, given a hero's welcome, and, get this, he was promoted. He spent the rest of the war in a training command, his shiny pre-war reputation completely protecting him from any real consequences. Unbelievable. All right, so if Fredendall's big problem was cowardice, our next guy's was pure vanity. Mark Clark wasn't afraid of a fight, not at all, but he was driven by something that can be just as deadly on the battlefield, a deep, deep thirst for personal glory that often came at a terrible cost for his men. This quote from a military historian just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly sums up the big criticism of General Mark Clark. He was a commander who seemed to understand newspaper headlines a whole lot better than he understood sound military strategy. 1,681. That's not just a number. That's the number of American casualties in just 2 days. It's the human price of Clark's ambition. He ordered the 36th Infantry Division to make a practically suicidal attack across the Rapido River. It was a terribly planned assault that had almost no chance of succeeding. But his most infamous moment, it came down to this one fateful decision. His boss, General Alexander, gave him a direct, crystal-clear order. Swing your forces around and destroy the retreating German 10th Army. This was the big one, a move that could have trapped and wiped out thousands of enemy soldiers. But Clark saw a different prize. He wanted Rome. He flat out disobeyed his orders and made a mad dash for the undefended capital, all for the glory of a headline. And here's the kicker, the ultimate irony. On June 4th, 1944, he got what he wanted. He got his triumphant entry into Rome, the big photo op, the whole shebang. He was the hero who liberated the first Axis capital. But just 2 days later, June 6th, the Allies landed in Normandy, D-Day. His massive achievement was completely buried by the news. That great prize he traded a strategic victory for was old news in less than 48 hours. But when it comes to crafting an image, nobody, and I mean nobody, did it better than our final figure, Douglas MacArthur. He was a true paradox, part military genius, part catastrophic failure, and a complete master of public relations. We've all heard this quote, right? "I shall return." It's one of the most famous lines of the entire war, said right as he was forced to leave the Philippines in 1942. It sounds so heroic, so defiant, an unbreakable promise to his men and to the world. But what did his own men think, the ones he left behind on Bataan, who were about to endure the horror of the Death March? Well, they wrote this bitter little song about him. They called him Dugout Doug, painting a picture of a general hiding in a bunker while they starved. The gap between that public image and the reality for his soldiers is just staggering. This right here, this might be one of the most inexcusable and weirdly overlooked failures of the entire war. After Pearl Harbor was attacked, MacArthur in the Philippines had nine full hours of warning before the Japanese bombers would reach his airfields. And what did he do at that time? Absolutely nothing. His entire Air Force was caught sitting on the runway and was utterly destroyed. It was a complete disaster that was totally preventable. So let's just recap this because it's wild. This is the MacArthur paradox. He abandons his army in the Philippines, an army that's about to be destroyed, and for their disastrous defense, he's awarded the Medal of Honor. While his men were being captured, he accepted a personal payment of $500,000, a massive sum back then, from the Philippine president. And this wasn't just a one-off. His habit of ignoring intelligence would pop up again years later and lead to another huge disaster in the Korean War. So after looking at these guys, you gotta ask, right? How do these reputations, which are so full of holes, become these heroic legends that last for decades? How does it happen? Well, it turns out there's kind of a playbook for it, a 4-step guide to building a military myth. Step 1, generate as much positive PR as you can. Build up that heroic public image. Step 2, downplay, ignore, or just completely bury your catastrophic mistakes. Step 3, blame somebody else. Shift the responsibility to your subordinates or your allies. And finally, step 4, after the war is over, write a memoir that makes you look great and control how history remembers you. Look, the point of all this isn't just to tear down old statues, It's about getting a more honest, a more complete picture of history. Wars aren't won by perfect, flawless generals. They're won by logistics, by industrial power, and most of all, by the incredible courage and sacrifice of millions of ordinary soldiers. And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. When a hero's public image is so different from their actual record, how should we remember them? Finding that balance between the myth and the man, that's a tough challenge, and it goes way beyond the battlefields of World War II. Thanks for joining me on this one.